Hello, and welcome to another episode of Social Workers Rise. Today, we are talking about human trafficking, and I do want to give you a trigger warning. This episode does contain conversations around rape, trauma, sex, and child exploitation. So you have been warned, but I do hope that you stick around to listen because we are talking with some experts based out of Santa Barbara County in California. And they are going to be sharing their experiences working with human trafficking and with commercial sexual exploitation of children and young adults. We're going to be hearing from Lisa Conn-Akoni, an MA and MFT. She has 25 years of experience working with historically underserved and marginalized youth and their families. And her efforts have really been concentrated on, quote, system-involved and trauma-exposed transition-aged youth program development and reform. She has done a lot of work around this area and with this population. I'm very, very excited to talk with her. Also, we will have Jeff Schaffer, and his professional experience includes actually being a pastor, an organizer, and an advocate. He's been working with marginalized groups in Santa Barbara County, and he's supported the coordinated services for survivors of human trafficking and sexual exploitation under the Human Trafficking Task Force. So we're going to hear from both of them, and I want you to stay around to the end to find out, what does lip gloss and hot Cheetos have to do with trauma-informed care? We're going to get right into this episode after this short ad from our sponsor, the Rise Directory. Hello, and welcome to another episode of Social Workers Rise. It is your host, Catherine here. We are here with Lisa Conn and Jeff Schaffer. Welcome to the podcast.
Thank you, Catherine.
Thank you.
Great to be here.
Yeah, can you both tell us a little bit about who you are and what you do? We heard, your bios in the intro, but it's always good to kind of see, exactly in your own words.
Jeff, you want to go?
Yeah, my name is Jeff Schaffer, and I just joined Kingdom Causes in September of this year because we received a grant from our county's Human Trafficking Task Force to help the task force develop a leadership team, a strategic plan to tackle labor and sex trafficking, create these action groups to carry out the deliverables connected to the strategic plan, create a funders collaborative, to help support all the good work that's happening and increase capacity for all of our partners. We'll talk a little bit about the need for that. And I got involved primarily after being involved with homelessness for 17 years in our county, and seeing how homelessness was the number one risk factor for trafficking as well. And also kind of seeing how difficult it is to tackle this issue and all the hard work that everyone was doing, but we weren't giving enough support to all of our boots on the ground partners, and we weren't creating enough policy change, and we weren't bringing enough funding. So I decided, well, let's step out of homelessness for a little while and dedicate as much time as I can and our organization can to kind of combating human trafficking. And our core mission of Kingdom Causes is to create holistic flourishing neighborhood by neighborhoods. And my job title is Santa Barbara County Catalyst. So I kind of say that gets me the ability to create good trouble. So I love doing that with Lisa. We have a lot of fun together, even though it's a very difficult topic to talk about. We've created a really great team. So thanks for having us.
Great. Thank you so much.
Yeah, so I'm Lisa Conn. I'm a marriage and family therapist, and I've been working with adolescents and their families, and in particular, adolescents that have experienced significant trauma, out-of-home placement, system involved. I've been doing that for a little over 25 years. And I have worked in many different settings in the mental health field here. I've mostly been in Santa Barbara County. But the one that really opened my eyes, even though I've worked with trauma for like 13 years at the regular community clinic, when I went to juvenile justice mental health, my whole world got flipped on its head, because I tried to go in and apply the regular trauma-focused therapy on the youth that I was seeing in there, and it just wasn't working. And that's where my eyes got opened, because I I thought I knew what I was doing, and I was in these other settings. But when it came to this population that doesn't normally get through the door of a regular clinic, they come through different doors, and we'll talk a little bit about that. But that's when we started seeing that there was some issue, and we started collecting data. And we have many partners that I realized when I tried to, get out the bullhorn about this, people were not listening. We learned about how important data is and relationships and working together. And so that's been my passion since like 2011, working with commercially sexually exploited youth. And right now I work with Kingdom Causes as well as an independent contractor. I'm also the clinical supervisor and program developer over Noah's Anchorage Youth Shelter, the Street Outreach Program, and My Home, which houses like transition aged youth. And then I also work with the Therapist Development Center, doing some trainings that we're going to be doing with CSEC as well. So we're just this requires you to wear many different hats, which I love because I don't like to sit still. This is a very action-oriented population and work. So we love it, and I love working with Jeff. And yes, we get into good fun, mostly always good fun, but sometimes get in other little trouble too.
Oh, good. Well, I have learned something already through your intros. I didn't know that homelessness was a precursor. I forget the word, but like a risk factor. There we go. Maybe risk factor for.
It's the biggest contributing factor to sex trafficking and I like people to understand it's not just a 15-year-old being homeless necessarily. Sometimes they're leaving home because it's not emotionally safe and sometimes not physically safe for them there. So they leave like the food, clothing, shelter, safety to go get love, purpose, belonging. And that's what the traffickers exploit. So it could be housing instability and homelessness, right? We always look at this on a continuum because someone isn't like housed in a stable home and then the next day just homeless, right? So It's sort of, especially with youth, we really look at sometimes their house is not a home and they leave to go seek it out.
Yeah, that makes sense. And the other thing that I learned from your intro is that the traditional trauma-informed approach is not effective, which we're going to talk about that later when we talk about, what do we need to know as social workers, as mental health professionals who are going in to work with this population. So listeners, stay to the end to make sure that you listen to that part because it's going to be really juicy. I can already tell.
Yes.
So first, let's just make sure that we're on the same page here. What is commercial sexual exploitation of children and young adults, aka what we might refer to it during the episode as CSECY?
CY.
Yes. So what is that? Can you tell us, what are we talking about?
Absolutely. And I'm going to actually read this off because it's a little dry, but then Jeff and I will kind of fill in because I want to make sure we hit all the main points. But and I'm going to break it down so we can understand because many people don't know the difference between like human trafficking and commercial sexual exploitation and sexual exploitation. And there's all these different layers to this, but I'm going to break it down so we can see. So commercial sexual exploitation of children and youth. And again, youth, we're going to be counting as those over 18 because once they hit 18, they have a different threshold of reporting for mandated reporters. Under 18, this is obviously commercial sexual exploitation is reportable. It's been reportable since 2015, and many people don't know this or don't understand how to report this. But we're still trying to get the information out. But it's basically sexually abusing a youth for economic gains in any kind of way. And this can include selling and trading for sex. Now, the selling, we understand, I think everybody has seen, somebody wants some sex act and they give the pimp a certain amount of money and then the sex act happens. That is so rare now, especially with like money apps and things happening on the internet. Sometimes it's just camera stuff. Sometimes it's pictures and videos that are sold. So there's many different facets to this. So anytime there's money changing hands, but the other piece is trading youth for sex. So there's also this power trade. So if you look inside of the gangs, for instance, sometimes you'll see younger people who are trying to make a name for us. They'll bring young girls to a party. They'll get them drunk and they will take advantage of them. Sometimes they turn them out eventually. So we always have to think about, sometimes it's not money that's exchanging hands. Sometimes it gives somebody a power up and a leg up in a system that helps them gain in the world in a different way than versus just dollar for dollar. There's also child pornography, which again, if anybody asks a 14-year-old girl for a picture of their body in any kind of sexually suggestive way, that is child pornography. So this is why we also have to educate our young girls and boys that these things can be on their record. These things can obviously get sent all over the place. So we have to be really careful, especially with the advent of it being so easy to take video and pictures. Sex tourism is another form of sex trafficking, child sex trafficking, where people go to certain places just because they know there's going to be a lot of sex tourism there. And that's like, you take a place like Vegas, right? That there's a lot of people go to Vegas just for the sex workers and the access to that. And then there's survival sex, which is probably the number one thing that Jeff and I see working with the homelessness issue here, is that if you take a 14-year-old who has run away from home, and whether that's because she doesn't feel safe there, she's not getting nurtured there, or she's running from her probation officer, or whatever that might be, how does a 14-year-old girl make it on the streets for 2 weeks? Like, who's taking care of her? Who's feeding her? Who's giving her rides? Who's giving her a place to sleep? Who's keeping her safe? It's usually going to be another adult. And if I was an adult and I found a 14-year-old girl, I would go call the police or call child welfare. I would get somebody to actually come help them. I wouldn't harbor them and keep them with me. So that already, even that part, it's like, how is she getting her needs met? And this is more likely what we see. And the youth don't even know that they're being trafficked or exploited, because they think that it's okay. I like him. Oh, it's not that big of a deal. Or, if they have an addiction issue, they need to get drugs or alcohol or whatever. They might have to do things to get that. So there's this exchange that happens, and the trafficker or the exploiter will make it look like this is a mutual thing, but somebody under the age of 18 cannot consent to this in any form. So the survival sex is really tough to identify, because they often won't even know that it's happening, because it doesn't look like your traditional sex trafficking where there's dollars being passed and you have buyers coming to a door and that kind of thing. And then transactional marriages and things like that, those are also forms of commercial sexual exploitation of children. So we see that sometimes in different groups. Sometimes you see young girls that are being kind of given to older men to be married off and things like that. So those are also commercial sexual exploitation. But the child sex trafficking, the difference between the under 18 and over 18 is the mandated reporting requirements for us licensed folks, and then also for how you manage these two things. That the qualification for children is that force, fraud, or coercion does not need to exist. A child under the age of 18 cannot consent. If she says, no, I love him, he's 30-year-old, I chose to go with him, she cannot. It's against the law. But if they're over 18, force, fraud, or coercion must be there in order for this to be considered trafficking. So this is a lot. So I just want to stop and make sure that all makes sense.
Yeah. And also, too, we are talking about California laws. Each state is going to have their own laws. So check with your local state, because it may be stricter, right? It may not be 18, yes. It may be stricter than that.
Yes. And so I think the mandated reporting is for CSEC is kind of universal, but every county, every state has a different threshold too. So it is really important to go and look in there. These definitions are from the Polaris Project, so it's national. So this is sort of your generic kind of thing. But yes, every little area has a different approach to it. So
Lisa, you may want to share a couple of ways you've seen it with younger, how have you seen this with young men and women? Like, what situations have you kind of worked
So for
within
instance, yeah, I think that's great. So for instance, like we have girls, and I worked with youth in a program we had called Rise, just like your podcast. We did that. Yes, we did that for 5 years. We got a $5 million grant, and we developed a whole program around there. It has since sunsetted, but we're using it as our template to move forward. But we would see girls that would come back from, let's say, group home placement. They're placed for whatever reason, whether it was through probation or child welfare. And they would tell us, they would get there. One of the things that's really unique about female in particular is that they tend to run away. So, we all have heard of fight, flight, freeze, right? Everybody's really familiar with these three things. Well, female in particular tends to do this other thing called tend and befriend as well. So fight, flight, freeze, tend and befriend. So, and it's a survival mechanism. It's really like, how do I get close to you, read you, make sure you're happy? If you're the one who could potentially hurt me, I want to know. I want to know ahead of time. I want to try to avoid that. So I actually pull in. Some people want to call this Stockholm syndrome or trauma bonding, but I just don't like. There's some stigma around those words. But this is a survival mechanism because the closer she can get, and the more she can read that person. I'm going to say it's a he because most traffickers, most pimps, most buyers are male. I'm not always, but I'm just in the interest of time here. So she'll get close to him. So what happens is, like, a girl goes to a group home, and one of the girls I worked with came back and told me exactly what happened to her. She went to a group home, got involved in some conflict, social conflict with the other girls, because now you've got it's a CSEC home. So there's 6 or 12 other girls that have also been exploited, all from around the place. They come with usually with a lot of street smarts, a lot of resiliency, and they don't put up with anything. So they are not your traditional trauma victim where they're kind of sad and depressed in the corner. And in fact, it was in the work I did at Rise with girls. I think we served around 200, 300 unique girls over the 5 years. Rarely would we ever have to call for suicide. Rarely did they get suicidal. They did other self-injury, which was more destructive to their bodies out there and fighting and running away and stuff. But so she went to this group home. She got in a conflict with some other girls, and she wanted to run because that's what they do. They run away. So after the tend and befriend, they get really close. And then when they have the blow up, they don't know what to do. And then they often will go into the fight or flight. So they go run, but the other girls have already been groomed there because the traffickers know exactly where the group homes are. So when the girl wants to take off, she goes, well, don't worry. If you do, just call my friend. He'll come pick you up. Right. And then she gives him the number. She goes outside. He absolutely calls her. These guys. So one guy took like a month, and she said he was so good. He would drive by the first time. He, whistled at me or said hi, and drove by again the next day, threw a little note, just said, you're really beautiful. You look interesting. I want to know more about you. And then, she kind of got messages to him the next time, like, I think he ended up buying her some kind of soda or cookies or something like that, and put him in a little care package. And then he tossed her a phone, right? Put that in the bushes, right? So it's this thing. And she said the first time I got into his car with him, she said he didn't try anything with me. He was so nice, blah, blah, blah. And then he was like, then the hook comes, right? Hey, do you want to come hang out? I know you're younger, but you seem more mature than all these other girls. Why don't you and your friend bring one of your girlfriends, and I'll take you to a party? And then he's got her.
Right.
Okay? And she said he was so patient. Right. And this is one of the grooming. And then we have other girls that will say, I think I shared with you, just like, oh, it's not that big of a deal. Like, yeah, he's older, but it's okay. It's like, I didn't have to do a lot. No, I wanted to. It's okay. It's not and you'll see them sort of in this process of minimizing it, because sometimes they don't have to do the full kind of sex act. Sometimes it's just things, or that just doing like dancing or taking their clothes off or giving pictures. But then we have some girls that literally, it's like, they call them skip parties, where it's like, it's a tactic that they use, and it's oftentimes used by gang members who are usually the traffickers. There's lots of organized crime that's involved in this, not usually just one pimp or a trafficker. And they'll go to girls that look like they might be having a hard time at home or struggling with their self-esteem, and they'll say, hey, they'll kind of groom them for a little bit. Do you want to go to a party? And we're going to have it tomorrow in the afternoon during a school week. Okay. So one is like, they want to do it so no one's really going to notice, because it's like, just come over for a couple of hours and go home. Parents don't know you ditched until whatever the school report said. But the bigger thing is they want to know which kids will break the rules. Okay. And then, so if that girl comes to my party, then I know, and she brings a friend, it's like I told her, she's listening to me. She wants my affection, my attention. And now she ditched. She's not going to tell anybody because she doesn't want to get in trouble. But I know something about her now. She's willing to give up safety, right, and security to go find love, purpose, and belonging. So these are just some examples. And that girl that went to that party that then got plied with a bunch of alcohol, possibly drugs, and maybe passed around that time or passed around the next time, she doesn't even know that that's exploitation. So how can she report this? How can she name it? Because she thinks she went there willingly. But you try to
Right.
put a 14-year-old up against a 30-year-old career criminal, mastermind, manipulator, right? That studies psychology maybe more than we do. She doesn't stand a chance.
And it's interesting because as you're talking, I'm wondering, where does these, it must be a fine line or maybe a gray area between self-determination and like our responsibility as professionals to keep them safe. Because while we do want to respect their autonomy and encourage, empower them to make their own decisions, it seems like it would be really, really difficult because they're making a decision that looks safer than their current environment at home. And that seems like a really tough spot to be in.
It is. And Catherine, that's a perfect way to put this problem, right? It's a conundrum because, it is very difficult to watch a 14-year-old girl walk out the door out of your office when she's not done, right? So when we look going back, so this is the hard part. It's a crime of psychology, much like domestic violence or intimate partner violence, where people go, why did you go back? Why did you go back? Well, we're talking about adults that have agency, that can actually go get a job or, work somewhere or whatever, and they don't know how to leave, right? How is a 14-year-old going to know how to do this? These guys come and get them. So and some people liken it to, addiction. They keep going back and they have all these relapses, which I don't like. I don't like using that pathological. We celebrate the returns versus focusing on the relapse, right? We're focusing on the positive stuff. You show up for 5 minutes out of your hour. That's a win on my part. I don't go, oh, you missed your appointment, so your case is going to get closed. We don't do any of that, but it is very difficult to allow that choice and that empowerment. But it has to be there because I have found anytime someone tries to rescue or save, or they used to in our county when I first started this, the judge was like, well, we'll just put them all on probation because we're a dual jurisdiction. So, we're not a dual jurisdiction. You're either probation or child welfare. You cannot be both. The best is both because you can keep cases open on both sides. So a lot of times they go to juvenile probation because they could at least lock them up to keep them safe. Well, what you do when you take a female, lock her up, you now associated her with even more gangs and criminalize her. And now she's ashamed. Now she's in trouble. Now she's getting charges because she, had a dirty test or she didn't show up for a probation thing, and just stack, right? And so it's very complicated and challenging to do this work, knowing that that person is going to leave and likely not be extracted out of this life or know how to leave or know what it is for sometimes years. It's really hard, and it's hard on us to do the work. It's hard to prepare yourself for that secondary trauma. The stories that you hear and the things that you see, it's really tough. Like we just had a girl at our site that, she told us, I got to get out of here, but they placed her with us. And she said, they're going to come and get me. It's like, and they did. They pulled up in a car, took her. We found her down in LA, and she was with people that were not safe in an unsafe place. So, and in that little bit of time, she was gone for about 4 days. And in that little bit of time, in the place that they found her, there was several adult men. We have to assume that she'd been sexually assaulted numerous times because they have a quota that they have to reach. So it's anywhere from 5 to 15 to 20 times a day that they have to perform these sex acts. So when she comes back, so she's not just raped one time, right? Or it's not even just a gang rape. And I hate to say this as if it's something small, like a gang rape is small, but what happens to the girls is every day, all day, no break, no nothing, and it's just sex, right? So how do you treat that? This is different than any kind of PTSD or compound trauma that we think about. We know that sexual assault is really difficult, but we usually don't have this many. We're talking sometimes hundreds of perpetrators of adult men buying sex or pimps running them, right? And so every day that happening, so we're like over the lifetime, we're talking thousands. So what do you do with this? It's very complicated to treat, to see, and then they don't present as the perfect victim. They don't ask for help. They're not going to self-identify. And in fact, usually they get found by law enforcement who want to get the bad guy, which we need to, but in that process, she's just a means to get information on them so that they can prosecute. They're not, and she's usually cussing them out, refusing to cooperate. She usually makes a big scene in front of the traffickers because it's not safe for her not to, right? And when she's talking to us, never is she more at risk, because that's their property and she's their money, and the consequences are very high if they get caught.
Right.
So
when we escalate the legal consequences, we escalate the risk to the victim directly.
I don't want to miss out on this idea too of
Yes.
secondary trauma. And when we talk about,
Yes.
since it's for people interested in, either social workers or people interested in that kind of work, I think one of the things I've seen it more in working directly with people on the streets and all the partnerships that do it there. It's that we have to do a better job of kind of assisting our social workers, making sure they have everything they need, building capacity so we can actually pay them more for this hard work. So one of the things Lisa and I are working on is we're trying to build a better system so that young people working earlier with college students, if they have an interest in going this kind of work, is how do we create a better support system for them? How do we help these agencies that are hiring them to make sure they have the right training and then they have the right support? I can't tell you how many people I've worked with that have been doing direct social work with people on the streets for a long time, but they don't even often get to meet with their own supervisors who ask them, how are they doing? So I think there's a whole system that we need to look at, because you can see the amount, as Lisa talks, you can see the amount of work we have to do and the amount of kind of secondary trauma and things that are boots on the ground people experience. And part of our job kind of helping to coordinate is, to bring more capacity and support to them and hope in the midst of the hard work they're doing.
Right. Just trying to recruit them into this work is really challenging, because a lot of people, as you said, kind of the savior thing, right? That they go in and thinking, oh, I'm going to get to help children arrest, but it's a long game. It is a process that takes a very long time of mostly outreach and engagement initially, and just getting them comfortable to see you. Sometimes they return back to you tons of times before they actually start to open up. And so it does require a lot of infrastructure of support for the either youth care workers that are unlicensed, that are like intensive case managers and outreach workers, or the licensed staff to really, they need what they've found. And West Coast Children's Clinic did some research and some recommendations around this. And they basically said all staff, including unlicensed staff, have to have double what you would have for normal clinical supervision for licensed folks, that just to do this work to reduce burnout and get really good at what we do, because it's nothing like I learned in school, that's for sure.
Yeah. And I'm glad that you brought this up, because here on the Social Workers Rise podcast, I'm really a strong advocate for the social workers themselves. And it sounds like doing this work, you're exposed to trauma every single day. And you're right. It is important to have that extra support and be financially compensated for the energy and the skills that you are bringing. Because like you said, this is not like a swooping in, right? Like this is a long-term game that we're doing here. And a lot of times I feel like the stereotype or the idea of people doing human trafficking work, or, on the rescue side, if you will, is that they're just going to, roll up to the girls and swoop them up and say, hey, we're here to save you. And the girls say, yay. And that's it.
Never seen it happen in all the years. Never seen it happen. Not one time.
Yeah. You will get punched in the face if you try to do that.
That's right. That's
Literally.
Right.
Yes. Literally.
Yeah.
See, Catherine, you already know.
Yeah, no, there is absolutely no way. This work is not for me, but there are people out there like you guys who are fabulous at it. And I hope that some of our listeners are at least encouraged with this information, just knowing a little bit more about it, knowing that there is a need for non-licensed and licensed people, because, it's hard right now. Like the economy's hard. We're looking for jobs. So we want to know that this is available. Before we get into like more job specifics, because I do have some job questions for you, I'm wondering, like, how big is this on a national level? Like, what are we looking at here?
Yeah. So I just looked up the most recent statistics, and want to give a little caveat here is that all the statistics in this, you ask different organizations, everybody has a little bit of a different number because there is an issue with the definition of what is confirmed versus what's suspected. So, as a clinician doing counseling, if the client tells me this happened, it happened. If I'm probation, you have to prove it, right? So that's always been an issue. But the National Trafficking Hotline said we got 2021 got 50,000 human trafficking calls, and of that, right, California is consistently the highest amount of reports. So we're at 13% of all the states, which is way higher than anybody. Now, what's hard about this is trafficking happening more in California than it's happening in the Midwest? We don't know, because is California just better at reporting? We don't know. We don't have a way to tease this out. This is why these numbers get really complicated. And of all the calls and text messages and emails that the hotline received, you don't always get this was a 13-year-old girl or this was somebody from so and so. So sometimes they can't even pare down the information because they are not collecting that kind of data on people. They want them to call and not feel like they're going to get hounded, right? They do have a lot of self-reporting, but it's not thorough. So they give different names. They might say a different age. They're just if they're under 18, they're likely on the run and somebody's looking for them, and it's usually probation. They're going to get arrested, and so they don't want to come home. So it's really complicated in that. But when we did, just in our county alone, West Coast Children's Clinic did some research all along sort of California and looked at different areas. And our system involved youth, so that's juvenile probation and child welfare. We are out of every 10 of those kids involved in those systems, 3 of them are either strongly suspected of CSEC or confirmed. So we have a higher average than the rest of California. And it's difficult because, again, each county, each state, they all do stuff differently and they count and calculate. So that's why Jeff and I have been sort of banging our heads to try to get like uniform data, shared data, unduplicated data. And everybody has a different system. Things can't get shared. So it's very complicated. What I will say is that it is a very big deal. And out of all of the human trafficking cases that were reported of all times in the national database, 50% are children. Okay, and of those 50%, almost all of them are female. So this is again, this is consistent across the board everywhere. Now, worldwide, it looks a little different depending on different countries and stuff. And I'm not an expert in those areas, but people think United States we don't have domestic trafficking here, that it's all kids from other countries. We don't need that. We have kids on the street every day. They don't have to bring somebody in from another country. We've got kids right here that they can exploit and use, and they do.
Right. And that's a really heartbreaking statistic. I did the math on that, and that is 5 to 6 people calling in per hour throughout the day, calling in on this hotline every single day. So that's a lot of people. So I'm wondering, what are some of the challenges that we should be aware of? So if we're interested in getting into this work, what do we need to be prepared to see or to deal with?
Yeah. Well, I think, this is, again, a multifaceted issue, but if we just staying focused on the workers and recruiting people to do this work, we have to do that because there's already just a mental health, social work shortage everywhere. I mean, we've got really good paying jobs that used to be the golden goose egg. Nobody is working that way anymore. It's changed, and it's not just because of the pay and the secondary trauma. There's a lot more options now for people in the behavioral health, social worker field to do online work and remote and stuff. But we really need people to be pipelining from early on, and that's what Jeff and Kingdom Causes do. They get young people early in their college career, hit high schools too, to get them interested in this work. And I will say one of the things that was the best and probably worst at the time thing that happened to me was I went from my desk assessor doing assessments, Medi-Cal, billing, treatment plan, telling my little team what to do in my office. My clients got brought back to me behind the bulletproof glass, sign your name, wait in the waiting room, right? That was my life. I thought I had made it. I had windows and, I was like, and then they're like, you're going to juvenile hall. Your office is going to be shared with 3 other clinicians in an old cell with no windows. And I was so upset. I was like, what? And then I got there, my treatment that I had thought I'd nailed down so good, and my trauma work that I had been doing for 13 years did not work at all. So then I got that, and then I was in kind of an environment that was like, who is this mental health lady, right? We have a different mindset because now I'm working with probation, but it was the best thing that ever happened to me. Outside of my other stuff, my child and getting married and stuff, but professionally and personally, it pushed me out of my comfort bubble. I created friendships that I never would have done before. I found a purpose in my life. That working with the youth, they're the easy part of this. It's the systems that are around that. And then learning that, I used to be like the torch and the hammer. That was my approach. Well, Lisa, I was not very popular. Like everyone's like, Lisa's coming. Oh God, like let's not invite her, because I became a harbinger, right, of bad news. And I had to realize I had friends to help me. Jeff was one of those ones. He's like, kind of softens things. So the truth is the truth, but you don't have to scream it. You want people to come to the table, right? So we really need young people that have, and not just young people, but people young in this profession to come in and try this out, because I don't think I would be where I am today professionally or personally. It makes you really look at yourself. And I did get good supervision where I was, luckily, and I sought it out. And it changed the way I looked at the world. I healed myself in the process. I know we don't go into this work to heal ourselves, but I mean, come on. You do that in anything you do, like helps you get better if you let it and you want it. But it is really about the genuineness. And what I appreciate about this work more than anything is you cannot BS anything in this. Those kids see right through you. So you have to come straight, right? Because they're going to notice and they're going to tell you and they're going to poke and so it actually really, it's kind of like a deep dive into your own kind of clinical supervision process, because you are also witness, like we ask our kids, be witness in your process to do the work. Like, well, so do we, right? I got to get witness too, all through my career. I'm never done. And so I've never had, and I work with, again, some of the most disheartening, sad, scary at times stories. I've never been happier. I've never felt more engaged, more alive in my work. The relationships I've formed, because the people that do this work are special, really special, and a little wacky, which is right up my alley. I'm very happy about that. So it's just a really great, inspiring work. And I hope that people that want to do this or interested that we can fire a little spark under that, because there's a lot that needs to be done, and there's kind of a place for everyone if you're interested in kind of slipping in.
So what I'm hearing. Go ahead.
I'd say
Jeff.
one of the unique things we did was create these college campus trafficking action groups, which are really ways for us to bring more interested young people on board. And the difference between homelessness and human trafficking, right, and CSEC is that homelessness is in front of you every day, whereas human trafficking is less visible. So there's a huge education piece we need to do. But the thing Lisa didn't mention is that, human trafficking globally is $150 billion industry, right? And that's labor trafficking and sex trafficking. But we've got to recruit as many resources to fight this as resources are going into, that traffickers are greedy and making the money. We need to raise those kind of resources to support. So the other thing about that we have to have social workers understand, we have to do better support for them. But as they come involved and they join agencies and then they rise up, right? They move up into higher positions. If all these boots on the ground agencies are not collaborating and working together and they get isolated, then really that's when we don't do a good job. We have to all work together. It's kind of an all hands on deck approach that we're trying to create. And so I'm hoping that people, as they enter into this kind of work, can begin to recognize that and how effective it is if we work together.
Right. So part of a trauma assessment, right, is when you look at the CANs or any kind of, assessment tool that's for trauma, they typically say, like, did this happen? Did this happen? Did this happen? And it requires you to ask those questions. Well, this population does not answer questions like that. So number one, you have to assume it's there. So I go from from jump and say, where, in the way I learned in psychology was, not to assume and to kind of, how do you know until you ask? And it was this sort of, this sort of assessment interview process. But then we all ended up, with our clipboard and our checklist, right? And sometimes that first initial assessment is, you're filleting this person that they just met you for the first time. You have to have all this information, right? So we really flipped that on its head. So it is not the intake process up front. It is, we don't have a clipboard. I have hot Cheetos and lip gloss, okay? And maybe a sandwich. It's the cheapest therapeutic tool I've ever had in my life, okay? I just meet them first. So if I meet them with clipboard and a 4-hour assessment, and then you're going to tell the assessor this, and then they're going to assign you, they're going to staff a case, and 2 months later, you're assigned to your team, and we don't even know where the hell you are anymore, right? So it doesn't work. They don't come in through the door that way. You have to go find them. And in systems where you call, they make an appointment, they take all your symptom checklists and go through that. Our girls are so transitory that they can never get a school assessment. I shouldn't say never. They rarely are able to get like a school assessment done because they don't stay put long enough. And whether that's them running back and forth or getting incarcerated or going to different group homes, or they just don't go to school, it's a plethora of things. So that traditional sort of trauma-informed care where they come to you and then you get to ask all the questions, and their symptoms are so clear on the DSM that you kind of understand that that's happened. Ours look like, as you said, kind of like they might pop you in the face. They might tell you to F off, right? They are not coming saying, oh, help me, I'm trafficked. And because it just doesn't happen. So part of this is to just change the way we move. And so I'm more about like just understanding, like my process is the relationship is the intervention first and foremost. If you don't have a little bag of tricks in there that you learned or whatever that's worked, that's okay. If you draw a blank, she just told you the most just shocking story you've ever heard in your life, that's fine. Just be there, right? Just be present. Get a cup of tea, take a walk with her, whatever you need to do. Don't think you have to do something. And so the first and foremost piece of this is the relationship, and then the outreach and engagement. So it goes like this kind of stabilization process, but you're always building the rapport and relationship because sometimes it takes a very long time to get there. And my process of celebrating the return, so we don't have a waiting room, we have a welcome room. Okay, so at our site with Rise, they can come in at any time, the refrigerator, the drinks, the hot Cheetos, the cup of noodles, whatever it was they wanted, bathrooms full of makeup, feminine products, whatever it is that they needed. They didn't have to go, can I get a soda? Can I get some water? Like, no, you don't have to ask. This is your place, right? We have bean bags. It's very set up. So it's really about, it's almost kind of like also addressing the youth culture versus adult culture. So if you look at, how clinics are typically set up, they're very nice for adults, but teenagers might not always want to be there. So it's really meeting them where they are. And then the outreach and engagement looks very different. Again, I don't know what a 50-minute therapy session looks like. I do in private practice, I have those, right? When it's just the hour thing. But here you just don't know. And everything is therapeutic. So it's about that relating. I come genuine, I don't judge, I walk alongside, but you are the driver. I don't have any power over you, but I recognize inherently the power differential in my position as an adult, my position as a licensed therapist or whatever. I have to recognize that I have this influence, and I don't want to exploit their fear, their insecurity, their trauma, and put me in the position of like, well, I'm going to get her safe because I'm going to show her that I know better. We have a tendency to want to wrap our arms around, but if you do that, you're just like everybody else for them. So what I want is for her to see, like, I ask nothing of you. Just show up. And that's enough. And I'm never going to say, well, you're 30 minutes late. That's not how I agreed. Thanks for showing. I got 30 minutes because, right, I'm back to back. I got a client after this, but we can make it up somewhere. Celebrating those returns versus focusing on the deficit mind of things. Reduce risk, reduce what? Reduce to zero, because it doesn't go in the other direction, right? And then what happens? So we got you from 10 to 0. Now what? So now you're absent risk, but you have no joy and happiness in your life. So we're really working on this other level. And if we can show through the relationship, that's where that corrective experience and that healing happens. And I really, truly believe this population and all population, trauma-informed care has to go to this level. We need to get out from behind our desks, out from behind clipboards, lengthy assessments, all that stuff, and start relating. Yes, you'd be surprised how much information you get after they get to know you. I mean, or go to their house. That's an even bigger eye opener, but it gives you a whole different sense. And then you could do all kinds of stuff because that trust is there. And most importantly, I trust myself to be there as a clinician, right? I know that even if I don't have the answer, I'm going to go, I don't know, you stumped me today. Can we do something else until tomorrow and then I'll get back to you? Or let me make a phone call, or, hey, how I handled that yesterday, I don't like it. I didn't like how I did that. Can we try this again? Because I'm going back. I'm also role modeling. This is how you solve problems, how you say, I'm not sure. I don't have all the answers. Right. And so it's really about this relating first, and then we can apply all the trauma-informed care we want. But it's still medical model-y to me. This is my experience. It's still got, and I've done it for years. And I literally had to they had to pry it out of my cold, dead hands because I saw how it worked in these other places so well, and I was comfortable with it. And it is a little free flow. And it feels good. I like that kind of work. I like that action and that kind of movement. But the biggest piece is the genuine connectedness that you get. It's just, and you're not responsible for them, right? They're responsible for themselves. And so it's a different relating, and it reduces the traumatic secondary trauma because I'm not in charge of their safety in their life. Right, it's switching that off, and it's hard to do because it's a kid. I'm not going to lie; I don't always do the greatest job at that.
Right, that's powerful. I mean, we're tossing aside the clipboards, leaving the pens at home, bringing the lip gloss and Cheetos. I am for it.
Hot Cheetos, it's hot Cheetos.
Hot Cheetos, yeah. Nobody wants the regular Cheetos.
No, hot Cheetos.
Yes, I love this. One question that keep popping up for me, and I feel like I should ask is, if we have our own trauma and our own experiences, and maybe we've been in the life ourselves, do you think that would hinder our ability to do this kind of work?
No, not straight up, right? But you have to have a supervisor or a mentor that tells you countertransference is not a dirty word. It is. First of all, how would you not have countertransference to be a human being? I mean, it's impossible. And how I'm feeling in a room, I'm not the only one feeling like that. This person in front of me has probably also had this experience with other humans. Why not use it more as a compass? But if I'm afraid to go talk to my supervisor or the people around me and say, hey, I got really triggered, or God, I love this client. The ones that we don't talk about, the clients we really like, those ones are fine. We leave those out of supervision. We don't need to talk about them because we feel so good. Right. And they might have the most issues going on and you have no clue, but it's the ones that we don't feel good around, or that we're like, we're kind of like, how do I work with this? I don't feel like, right. Those are the ones we usually take, but countertransference goes both ways. It's what I'm drawn to and ones that I'm not. And so, yes, if I feel like this, I'm sure someone else has felt like this. I'm sure this youth has experienced this. And I always say that my job is to create a container, and as much as I can, get out of my intellect, which we think we're at, like when we were, evolved, whatever the hell that is, like we have this education, we've got our license or whatever that looks like, that we figured it out. But sometimes when you're just up here in the intellect, you're so far away from your emotion that you're a robot. Now you're not like human. I always say the wise mind is right here, right between the intellect and the emotion. And it's a nice synthesis between the two. And that is a space of presence. And I'm not thinking about what I'm going to say. I'm just with that person, right? I'm trying to have those moments where you get the goosebumps, right? And you're locked in, and something's happening. It might just be fleeting, but that's okay. I don't need it to be the whole time, right? And so that secondary trauma stuff is going to get triggered, especially if you have trauma already. And yes, we are 100% responsible. Like what happened to us when we got abused or victimized was not our fault. But it is our responsibility to manage. So we have to lead by example. And how am I supposed to tell somebody, come tell me, be witness in your vulnerability, and I don't do it myself? I have to, in order to inspire, I have to walk my talk. Okay. And so sometimes they tell you, like, oh, I got some work to do. I got really triggered by this. I got to go, you know. And so I think sometimes it's the people with lived experience that can sit in front of someone else and be like, I don't know exactly what's going on for you, but I've been somewhere similar, and man, it was tough. And I'm here.
Yeah. Yeah. Powerful. I love that. So if we are interested in getting involved in this work, you all are based in the Santa Barbara County, in California. What do we do? How do we learn more? What are our next steps?
Jeff.
Well, probably every county, so everyone could Google and see if you have a local task force. So that's one way you can kind of find out what's happening in your local community already as far as a structural approach to kind of reducing or solving human trafficking. The Polaris website has a good 1 hour basic training on human trafficking. There's a lot of resources on the Polaris website if you're interested in the topic as a whole. And then usually if there is a task force, then they can kind of direct you, or some kind of hub for efforts. They can direct you locally to agencies that maybe you want to intern at, or you have an interest in finding out more. So to me, those are kind of some of the ways that you can find out that something's happening in your neighborhood and you can join in. Locally, if people are interested just in what we're doing in Santa Barbara County, I can give my contact information, and it's Jeff.Schaffer, SHAFFER at kingdomcauses.org. And hey, it's everyone on deck. I mean, when I talked about business community members, we've got faith community leaders, we've got all the service providers, we're working on colleges, we're working with a couple of high schools to try to engage students just in educating and giving them an early passion if they have a heart for this. So hopefully that's being designated. Those kind of ideas are kind of popping up throughout our country, kind of creative solutions. But that's kind of my job, is like innovation and capacity building, and all those kind of things are fun for me. And to support, you can see why we're lucky to have a Lisa Conn-Akoni in our county. Every time I'm with Lisa, I'm like, oh, wow, I didn't know that. I didn't know that. I didn't think about that. So it's wonderful to have kind of these subject experts to help us along too.
Great. Well, thank you so much. Thank you so much for the work that you do and for coming on to the Social Workers Rise podcast. Listener, you heard it here. They are hiring licensed and unlicensed professionals. Yes. Hit them up. And there is a huge need all over the United States. So do not be shy. Research your own local human trafficking task force and get involved there. See where you can get started. Thank you so much.